What's up YouTube, Craig Lopez here with another Tutorialism. Now over the course of the past few videos I've been looking at how to produce a new disco style track from start to finish, and today we're going to be looking at mixing that track down. Now anybody who's familiar with my channel will know that I never dive into mixing or mastering because that's just not my forte. What my speciality is showing you guys and girls different techniques within Cubase, different production tricks and various different plugins, so on and so forth. I usually leave mixing and mastering to mixing and mastering engineers. So what I usually do with my tracks is mix them and master them at home, play them out in the club. If I get a good crowd reaction, then I'll send the stems off to a mixing engineer to sort that out for me. And what I was going to do in today's video was show you the difference between one of my mixes and a professional's mix. However, since I mixed down this track, I came across a YouTube channel that I wasn't familiar with. This guy here called Bathymetrics. And he's got this technique called clip to zero. So what I decided to do today was try out this clip to zero method on this same track. And what we're going to do now is compare my previous mix with the mix that I've done using this clip to zero method. So let's do an A/B comparison. Right, so I have both tracks loaded up into metric A/B here. I've got rid of most of the GUI, so we're just looking at the meters and whether I'm on track A or track B. So what I'm going to do is play a few bars of track A and a few bars of track B and keep switching between them, so you can really listen out to the differences between the two tracks and you can decide for yourself which one you prefer. Okay, so obviously quite a big difference between the two different mix downs there. Did you think one sounded significantly better than the other? Did you hear a big difference between the two? Do you think they both sounded like crap? Let me know in the comment section below. But anyway, track A is the track that I mixed down using this clip to zero method. So what is this clip to zero method? Let's have a look. So this clip to zero method is one that I picked up from this channel here, Bathymetrics. I don't know too much about the guy or where he's from, but he did give me a nice little shout out in his latest video, so big up for that. And on his channel, he does these really long, in-depth explanations of all these different production techniques that he incorporates into his own music. And he has quite a focus on making tracks loud, which obviously for me, making club music is something that I'm very interested in. The videos that I recommend that you watch to learn about this technique are this one here, Loudness is in the Mix, Not the Master. And Loudness is in the Mix, Not the Master Part 2. And if we scroll down, we have a Loudness walkthrough featuring the clip to zero method. A little bit of a shorter video there. But I would really recommend you watching these two here, the clip to zero production strategy and the clip to zero production strategy part 2. As you can see, they're quite long videos, so within the context of one of my videos, there's no way I'm going to cover every single thing that he says, but I will show you how I implemented some of his techniques in this mixdown. Now this clip to zero method basically comprises of 3 stages. The first stage is something that I didn't actually do, which is producing your track with this clip to zero technique in mind. Now, obviously I've implemented this using material that I've already used, so my track probably doesn't, or definitely doesn't sound as good as it maybe could have done. So that's my little caveat to begin with. Now, the second step in this technique is clipping, or sometimes limiting, the different elements in your track to zero, hence clip to zero. And the purpose of this is to get as many different elements individually as loud as they can be before sending them off to your master channel or your stereo out, so that the limiter that you put on your master channel has to do less work than it usually would, and therefore you will end up with less distortion and less artifacts, but still a very loud track. And if you're one of these people who just really doesn't like loudness or club music, then sorry, this is not the channel for you. If you want to argue with someone, feel free to put something in the comments, but probably not going to get a response from me. But anyway, I've got my kick group soloed here, and the first plugin that I have on it is this DP Meter 5 from TB Pro Audio, which is a free meter plugin. Now, if I play the kick group through it, you can see that the kick drum is peaking at minus 12.6 dB, and you can see that down here on the channel as well. And I want this to peak at 0 because this is the clip to 0 method. So I'm going to set my reference level to 0, and then click this M button under peak max, which is going to match the loudness. And as you can see, it's added 12.6 dB of pre-gain to this signal. Now if I play it again, you can see we're peaking at 0. And once the signal is at 0, the technique is to push that signal as high as we can through either a hard clipper or a limiter to get the signal to be as loud as it possibly can be before we start to hear a bit of distortion. Now, because we are at 0, we are going to get a little bit of distortion regardless. So it's all about using your preference and your taste to get that balance between loudness and distortion. If you drive it too hard, you're going to get too much distortion. If you don't drive it hard enough, it's not going to be as loud. So one of my favorite plugins ever is this Saturate by Newfangled Audio. Really simple plugin to use. You've got 2 controls, a drive, which pushes the signal through, and a clipper shape, which allows us to choose between a soft clip and a hard clipper. So let's have a listen to what happens to this kick drum as we drive it harder and harder through the clipper. So at the top limit here, you can hear it distort quite a lot. Let's see how far we can push it. So for me, about 2 or 3 extra dB on this kick drum sounds fine. Could maybe go a bit higher than that, but I'm going to keep it like this for now. And then once you have maximum loudness on the kick drum, you can either use your channel fader to get the right level, or use the output on your clipper. For me, I like to have my kick drum sat at around minus 9 dB, and then I mix all of my other elements around that. Now, once you've got your kick drum as loud as you desire it to be, you're going to want to clip other elements of your track to 0 as well. Now, let's say, for example, you have a little shaker that just happens sporadically through the track. You're probably not going to want to clip that to 0 on its own, because you're probably not going to need it to stand out as much as you need your kick drum to stand out, which leads us to the third part of this technique, which is grouping and subgrouping different elements of your track together. So let's have a look. So in this particular production, I have a snare and a clap, and they both happen at exactly the same time throughout the track, basically making them more or less a single instrument or a single sound. So what I've done is I've grouped these 2 sounds together and put them onto this snare bus. And it is with the snare bus that I have clipped these 2 sounds together, summed to 0. For the rest of my drums, I've got top loop, hats, live hats, shaker, glitchy bell. We had percussion, crash fill, zaps, cowbell, and a jazzy break. And all of those elements I've grouped together onto this bus here that I've called top bus. And it is the top bus that I've clipped to 0. I then got my kick group, snare bus, and top bus, and grouped all of those together to make a drum bus. And then it is on the drum bus that you guessed it, clipped to 0. Now my project is a bit messy because this is the first time I've done this, so it's not very well organized. As you can see, I've got a bass bus, which is my bass instruments that I have clipped to 0. I then got my various different synth instruments, grouped the ones that were working together, clipped those to 0, and then got all of my synths and clipped those to 0. I then got my drum bus, my bass bus, and my synth bus all together, made this instrument bus, and clipped all of the instruments together. And then I have a separate bus for just my vocals, so my 3 or 4 vocal channels, again, clipped those to 0, and then got all of my instruments and all of my vocals, grouped those together to make this pre-master. And then on the pre-master, again, clipped that to 0. Now, one of the cool little byproducts of doing all these little groups and subgroups was that it was a lot easier to hear when things were poking out and not really sounding right, which meant that when I made EQ moves on these groups, they were just a lot more significant and a lot easier to use, which I think is why I've ended up overall with a lot more of a cleaner mix, because like I say, it was a lot easier to identify problems using this method than my old school technique of mixing. So given that the whole purpose of this clip to 0 method is that you have everything as loud as it possibly can be before it gets to your master channel, and the reason for that is so that your master and limiter doesn't have to do as much work and therefore introduce as much distortion as it usually would using other techniques. So I bounce my master channel out, and on my master I'm using this new limiter, Smart Limit by Sonable. Okay, if you do want to check out Smart Limit or Saturate, check out my links in the description below. They are affiliate links, which means I do pick up a little bit of money if you want to go ahead and buy them, and it won't cost you anything extra, so it is a good way to support the channel. I also have a Patreon page if that's the kind of thing you're into, so check that out in the description below as well. And one of the reasons I recommend Smart Limit is these 2 buttons here, constant gain and delta. And what constant gain does is it allows you to hear what the limiter is doing without hearing a difference in volume. So with constant gain pressed in, if I press the bypass switch, we'll be able to hear the track with and without the limiting, but there will be no change in volume, so you can really hear what's going on. Let's have a listen to that. Very cool indeed, and you can see I'm adding 2.4 dB of gain on the master. And this delta button actually allows us to hear only the stuff that the limiter is removing, which can also come in very handy. So let's have a listen to what we're actually losing by limiting. A very cool little feature in here, and something that I've not seen in other limiters. Okay, so that was me implementing Bathymetric's clip to 0 technique. And personally, I had a lot of fun doing it, and I found the end results very satisfying. But this was just a very, very brief explanation as to what it is and how it works. So I highly, highly recommend you go check out his channel for more in-depth explanations and reasons as to why or why not you might want to or not want to implement this technique in your own productions. Anyway, that's it for now. I've been Craig Lopez. This has been Tutorialism. Now go make some music. Peace.